Welcome back to another episode of the Coarse Grind. I'm Ethan from Empire Coffee, and I'm here with my co-host Paul from Derelict Coffee. How are you, Paul?
Good, bro. You?
Not bad. Can't complain on a sunny winter's day like today. So today we're going to talk on a topic that I think is quite near and dear for Paul here. I think he's been a bit more passionate in our conversations in regards to this one.
It's been on my
kind of
shit
funny.
list.
It's definitely been on your shit list. It's kind of funny because before we actually decided like we're fully launching this thing, I'd made sort of kind of a joke that, each recording session, one of us would present the topic for that recording session to the other person the night before we went into recording. So, sort of throw that other person a little bit under the bus and make us work for it. Well, Paul gave me this one like 2 hours ago. So I'm well and truly underprepared for this.
Well, I actually forgot about that. So that's why off camera, I kind of gave you a little bit of shit about, well, you're the one that made me choose a topic. So, yeah, my memory's quite short about some things.
This is true. I did tell you to choose a topic. Next week, it's on me, I guess. All right, Paul, why don't you kick into it? What are we talking about today, mate?
The media, which is a really broad term, but the media specifically around talking of coffee prices. Like, I'm all for bringing awareness to things, but at what point does it become, let's face it, flogging a dead horse? At what point does it become unhelpful to hospo in general, the coffee industry in general? So, yeah, we saw it years ago with one of the media commentators saying, if you want a mortgage, stop buying coffee, which at the time I said, well, if that's where we're at in society, that you can't spend 15 minutes of your daily income on something that gets you out of bed and potentially to a job that you're not all that happy about, or gives you a break at lunchtime to take a walk and have a yarn with somebody about life's problems, maybe we've got much bigger problems in general. And so now, fast forward to probably January, February, and a few of the commentators and a few bigger names in hospo have brought up the green coffee price going up, and therefore probably the most significant change in coffee pricing across the board in a very long time, which has been quite polarizing for people because every other week, I want to say two-bit journalist is writing an article about this rather than really finding anything new and interesting to write about. And so the first once or twice that you read it, you're like, okay, coffee's going up. Great, that's good to know. I'll brace myself for it. But when every other week you've got some other media platform writing an article that coffee's going up another $1, and you read the comments, everybody's swearing off coffee because it's a bit like the gas prices during COVID 5 years ago, whatever, when when petrol was over $3 a litre. It was the thing that was beaten on about. Same with butter now. But my thing is, at what point does that start being detrimental rather than actually helpful to hospo, to the coffee industry?
I think it's interesting that you bring up fuel prices because I think we have to separate ourselves a bit on the conversation there because fuel prices, I mean, that has been major, and that's been major since I was a kid. I remember when, fuel was teetering on around that just over $2 mark. And that's my first memory of fuel prices. Now we're in that $3 mark and somewhere in between, right? The wife tells me all the time, Gull's 10 cents off a litre, Mobil's 10 cents off a litre, go to Allied, it's cheaper today, sort of thing. And that's all well and good.
Yeah.
But I've also done the math in my head and I've said, well, if I'm putting 40 litres into the car, 10 cents off a litre, that's $4 saved. Yeah, that adds up over the time, but I've got to go out of my way. The reality is for me, fuel is a necessity, right? So it doesn't really matter in the long run how much the price of fuel is. I still need to fill up the car.
Yes.
Coffee, on the other hand, has become a luxury. And I say become a luxury because that coming out of the GFC in 2008, 2009, there was an article done here in New Zealand. And don't quote me who said it, who wrote it, but they talked about what was recession proof during the recession. And the two things that they said was cinemas, because back then cinemas were still a thing and they were a place that at the time was still cheap enough for you to take the family out to for a family outing, even when things were tight. Number one job that was recession-proof was being a barista, because back then, everyone considered coffee as a necessity. It was not considered a luxury product. Now, we're talking 17 years ago. And in that 17 years, what we have seen is from that time, media, in my opinion, turn on coffee, use coffee in every possible way, price change of coffee, so on and so forth. Advertising agencies, marketing agencies say for less than the price of a cup of coffee a day or a week or a month or whatever, as a way of getting you to sort of, they're not saying stop drinking coffee so you can get this, but it creates a subconscious change that in your head that if
Absolutely.
I just don't get that cup of coffee, then I can get this, right? We went through this massive period of time where you're right. You couldn't buy a house if you bought a cup of coffee. You couldn't go get your smashed avocado on a Saturday morning if
Yeah.
you wanted to buy a
Yes.
house. And if you sat down and you worked out the numbers of what that one cup of coffee a day or one cup of coffee a week or whatever added up to over a year, I hate to break it to you, saving that money, you were still not buying the house, right?
No, not at
You
all.
still were not getting the house. Yeah, nice little extra in your deposit, but you still weren't getting the house, all right?
Not
So we went
at
through this
all.
period of time where banks and institutions basically said, if you want to buy a house, you have no life. You can't live. Anyone that knows me personally knows that I'm quite big on how money works and on budgeting and greater shares, investments, so on and so forth. But even I know that, you can't put everything into one basket. You still actually have to spend. You still have to spend on yourself. You still have to look after yourself and make that time. So banks basically said you weren't allowed to do that. You want to buy a house? There's no coffee. And the media really jumped on all of this. The narrative of all of this has been driven by the media.
Yes, it's interesting. I'm just going to jump in there, and you say about having, like, again, not being able to spend everything. And I remember again around the GFC, around '09, probably when I stopped watching TV. But there used to be like a budgeting program or something like that that they'd go through and look at people who are doing all kinds of horrendous things like going to the cinema and buying coffee. And they'd say, in your budget, you should give yourself, I think at the time, I remember around that time, my ex-wife and I used to give ourselves $25 a week as your sanity money.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's interesting, now we talk about that, and again, you see how much talk there is now around mental health and that sort of thing. You think, squeezing the absolute life out of anything that brings you joy so that you can have stability of owning a home or that sort of thing, that drives people into some pretty dark places, I feel. And I'm the first to put my hand up and say the same thing. Like, it's really interesting. Coffee has been made that sacrificial lamb.
It has. And don't get me wrong, over this period of time, I do feel that it has actually become a luxury item. I don't feel it is as much of a necessity item. Again, there is different levels in the coffee game. I mean, you've got commodity level coffee where I can walk down to one of the big department stores and buy a kilo of it for $25. As I'm keep being reminded on several Facebook groups that keep going on about how great this $25 a kilo coffee is. We don't play in that game. We're in a whole different league working with specialty coffee,
Yes.
right? And we all have our places, and it's not bagging on commodity coffee at all, right? We all have our place to be. And so, yes, we are dealing with a luxury item, and more so now than ever before. I do agree with you regards to the beginning of this year. I think the narrative was very different the beginning of this year, and I think that is a critical point to make. Previously, whenever I've heard talk about via the media about, the price of coffee going up, it's been around inflation or rent or wage costs or
Yes.
localized issues, all right, that impact every single business and every single home in its own way, shape, or form. And we just see on a gradual scale across the board. Like, it's always going to keep rising. That's never going to change. This time was
Yes.
different because it was in regards to something that people weren't, for the most part, actually weren't aware of. And that's how coffee is traded. All right. So they were able to create a bit of education around that in the process. I think that was really well spearheaded by Richard Corney from Flight Coffee.
Yes,
Whether he approached
absolutely.
him or they approached him, I'm not sure, but his original articles in regards to it were really well done, really well worded. I think what it really did for the industry this time round was it opened a door to say it's okay to put up your prices.
Yes.
Because the conversation had already been happening. So, I mean, we obviously, like most roasters during this period of time, we put our prices up, I think, around March. Our prices are going up again beginning of early next month in terms of our roasted coffee. And we were able to do that because the conversation had already been begun for us. I mean, we were able to do that regardless, and we would have done that regardless because we had to. But it made it easier as well because it wasn't just coming from the roaster to our clients. It was already spoken about. It was spoken about on a national level, which I think it has helped. I think the problem is that we then have to articulate to our partners, we put our coffee up, say it went up in March, $3 a kilo wholesale, right? Which was not a huge amount at all considering what was going on. That's only six, and trying to articulate that properly is a different story. I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent there, but whereas most of what we hear from the media is at the cafe level. It's the price of the cup that's going up. It's not the price of the bean, it's the price of the cup. So this year's, with all the conversation in regards to it, I think has been really good for the industry as a whole. It's not necessarily going to be good for everyone, but it has been good as a whole for the industry.
Yeah, and I have to really give credit to Richard. Richard's generally one of the first people to put his hand up and lead these things from the front. And I must admit, it doesn't always go well on the media forum for that. I've seen there's always negative comments around anything going up. And so, much respect to him for raising these conversations. And again, they do come up and then others chime in. And I've followed the conversation in Australia as well. And you see it coming up in the media over there, where apparently their coffee prices are getting even higher than ours, which, again, that's a whole nother story as to whether the cost of living is actually cheaper over there. But it's
to put
carry on.
Into a bit of perspective here. We are in our own little microclimate. Every country is to a degree in its own little microclimate, and New Zealand is no different there. So I know of a coffee roaster who's just spent the last 2 months on holiday over in Europe, because obviously we gravitate to the things that we know and we love. They gravitated to food and coffee and a lot of those sorts of places and cafes and establishments. And I was chatting away with him and he was saying, for him to get a small flat white in most countries over in Europe was costing him €6. Put in perspective, €6 is about $12 New Zealand. Right? He showed me a menu board of single origin coffees in one of the roasteries that he was at. I mean, 3 or 4 of those single origins I can get access to myself. And they're charging for 250 grams of those beans about €25, which again is about $50 New Zealand. Whereas we would look at it and we'd be like, that's a $22 single origin, right? The living cost over there is saying that, it's not, from what they could tell and from the information that they gathered from friends while they're over there, it's not much different than New Zealand. Housing market might be a bit different. Wages aren't much different. And yet, this is the price point that people were paying for coffee. Whereas if we did that in New Zealand, if we said you're paying $12 for your flat white, I'd probably be the flat white.
With that is, usually with so many things that come into New Zealand, the New Zealand market isn't worth many of the big players playing in because we are so small and we are so isolated. And so you think, Europe, realistically, shipping should be cheaper. It's less of a distance and much better set up for it. When I say that our market isn't worth some of the big players playing in. So previously I worked for a big box retailer and selling TVs and hi-fi. Our market was worth 72 hours of production a year to Sharp to produce televisions, which is why some of these things we just don't see. We're more of an inconvenience in New Zealand to many big players than we are anything else. So, okay, we've got some overflow. Yeah, we'll enter that market, or yes, you can buy from us because we haven't got much else to do. And so some of these things we do, we do bat well above our weight. And what you're saying about the cost of coffee and so on. Now, I had a customer this morning from Perth, and he's saying to me he's had coffee in many places around the world and had come to me this morning with his sister and said he had a coffee in Indonesia and it was made by an Australian guy, and he said it cost him $25, and he said it was pretty damn average. And you think, from all accounts of what I get told from people, and we like to lean on this reputation as well as having some of the best coffee in the world. My advice there is seek out the good stuff. Like in our launch episode, in our last episode, we said good is the death of great. And I think that's the exact thing. And again, you're talking commodity and specialty earlier on. And again, without naming anywhere or otherwise and comparing the price of coffee and price of petrol and things like that, and talking convenience and going out of your way. I'm a very big believer that in some circumstances, I'd rather drink a cup of 91 than I would the coffee.
Sad thing is I could see you trying that, Paul.
Yeah, just for the record, I do not condone substance abuse or sniffing solvents.
I want to confirm that you didn't try and drink chlorine during COVID.
No.
For me anyway, the real reason I have an issue with the media and the media's conversation around around coffee and coffee prices is it's put us on the same level as fuel and as housing, all right? As a product, I have never once seen an article or heard a news clip on the price of the freaking Big Mac.
Yeah.
14, 15 years ago, back when I was studying, I worked for Macca's, right? I was drive-through. I worked for Macca's. I could buy a fish fillet for $4.50 or a Big Mac for $5.10, and a combo cost me like maybe an extra $1.50. If that.
Yeah.
All right?
I remember
it's like $8, $9 for a Big Mac.
I remember when I was at high school. So I was fifth form, so we'll be talking mid-90s. So say 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You remember the $5 combo?
Yep. Yeah, I remember.
Case in point. So back then,
I remember $3 Big Macs on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, but my point is $5 combo. Back in 1995, the coffee industry was kicking off. We were probably looking in Wellington, and I'd love someone to correct us on this in the comments. Say we're looking at $3.50 for a flat white, for a standard flat white. $3 even. You go and get a $5 combo now. What was that? A drink, a cheeseburger, and otherwise, what's that now? $10?
Yep.
There we go.
Easy. Well, and that's what I'm saying. The Big Mac is like $8, $9, $10 now just for the burger, right?
And
so
yeah,
in 14 years, the price of the Big Mac has pretty much doubled. And yet, in that same time period, I started in the coffee industry. Small flat white was $4.
Yep.
All right. I'm the generation that it was $4. You're talking about back in 1995. I was born in 1995.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, the funny thing is, the reason
that regular flat white was $4. All right. Now, unless you're going to Auckland to Red Rabbit and potentially to the hangar in Wellington with flight, because I don't actually know what their pricing is. I know Red Rabbit put their pricing up into this area, and I'm really, really pleased that somebody actually did, right? But unless you're going to those places, you're not paying $8 for a small dine-in flat white.
No, not at all.
The price of the Big Mac doubled. We're still getting in queue for 30 minutes in drive-through, and the media's not talking about it, but the price of the flat white has gone up 50%, 60%. And
here's a good example. The reason I remember the reason I remember the $5 combo is because one of my mates dared me to walk up to the counter at McDonald's and ask how much a $5 combo is, and he'd buy me a 50-cent soft serve. Today, those 50-cent soft serves are $2.40. The soft serve is as much dairy-based as the small flat white is. I'm not going to go into the weeds of that because McDonald's have more money than me.
And this is not banging on McDonald's, by all means. Just to say, that's been all quiet in the media front. But coffee, time there's a little change in coffee, it's a big thing. If you look at 10, 20 odd years ago, even longer, right? You'd walk into a restaurant, you'd walk into a bar, you'd order whatever beer was on tap, you'd order the house red, the house white, you'd pay your whatever you'd pay. In that time period, we have created education.
Yes.
Right? And there's been a bit of media conversation, but nowhere near to the degree of coffee. But we've created this education, and we've watched the price of your beer that's on tap go from $5 to $12. Your house red go from $6 to $15. Like, I go to a cocktail bar, I'm paying $20 minimum per cocktail now. 10, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have even been a thing. Media hasn't bagged on so much about these. But coffee, it has. I think part of the reason is because it's still actually in its own, people in the media still consider coffee to be a necessity. It goes into the same category as fuel and housing. It's a necessity. Whereas actually we're in a day and age where it's more of a luxury. Unless you go to a petrol station.
Yeah. Well, I would go back to, again, the same point that I made with McDonald's is if you start bagging on the cost of a beer in a pub, it's mass-produced by very large companies who have a lot of money, who I'm not going to name. And again,
but even the craft beer industry, though, right?
Yeah, a lot of that's been brought out by the big companies too.
Yeah, but you've still got some. Okay, that's a whole nother conversation of big companies. I don't have an issue with the media having attention on the price of coffee as a general rule of. I think it's important. I think that the more, if this is the only way we can get that sort of education that's needed for consumers to have across, it's a great starting point, right? I think the problem, I think you nailed it with how you open this, is that it feels like every second day you're scrolling through Facebook or you open a paper and there's some person with a pen writing an opinion piece about the coffee industry or about the hospitality industry. And like, I mean, when you sent me a link from a publisher a month or two ago, and you sent me two links 2 days apart. And on the first day, it's basically said that you baristas, you're not that great. You probably should have made better life choices than being in the coffee industry. And then the next day, the article's like, how help the hospitality industry, they're struggling, go spend money. It was like, it's the same publisher, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, even the consistency in the media around coffee is not great. Like, it's really not great.
It's clickbait. I'm going to call it what it is. It is clickbait. And the media is known for throwing whoever under the bus they can to sell their product. It's not a good business model. But you can't argue with it. There's a lot of media around that are talking about things. There's some really good coffee media out there. Filter,
the Coarse grind being one of them.
Yeah, the Coarse grind. Like they're definitely worth a listen. Maybe
you might last 2 episodes of their rubbish.
But it's the mainstream media that the average person follows is a little weak, under-extracted, shall we say?
Under-extracted. That's a good term, dude.
Under-extracted.
Can you explain more to us what under-extracted means?
They're going for the low-hanging fruit. One of the links that I sent through was in regards to an interview with the guys from Ripe.
And they've created the Independent Coffee Roasters of New Zealand directory. A go-to spot to find anyone in the coffee industry like Paul and myself who are independent and not owned by a large conglomerate.
So they were interviewed, but then the counter interview, which I'll give them credit for the fact that there was one, identified, I think quite poorly, that, well, all roasters in New Zealand are independent because they're not government owned. And I thought, well, you're kind of missing the point.
And I think in that, I mean, not knowing personally the person they interview, but knowing the name and that person's sort of bit of that person's background, I'm pretty sure there was probably a far better quote in the interview that they had with him to use than that. And that was quite poor, like, in my opinion. Like, I don't say that I agree or disagree with what he said, but as a counter quote, it was sort of like we need to slap something in here that looks good, done, click, go, send, I want to go off and do something else now. Like, it just didn't really encompass the full story of what's happening in the coffee industry.
Absolutely.
I think it is important to look at it from both perspectives, from all sides of it. That's, to me, good journalism is an unbiased look.
Again, that quote was very weak. I honestly feel like it actually shat on the hard work that these guys were doing and the whole premise of what they were trying to do. There was no digging deeper. I can't comment on what else was said in the interview. I can only go off the article. But again, a journalist with a decent grasp of English would generally understand that no one was inferring that the government owns any coffee roasteries. The whole taxation system is based on incentivizing things the government does not want to get involved in. Like, it just seemed like poor journalism, and that opportunity to really make an article that would help people understand. In so many spaces, people talk the talk of supporting small business, buying New Zealand owned, buying local to keep profits local, buying local, made local. All these things for the cause, be it betterment of your neighbourhood, betterment of the country, and those sorts of things. And I think, again, it was that point of buying local because then the profits stay local as opposed to a big company and so on. But we're getting into the weeds of that.
There's an opportunity here for them, you're right, for them to dig deeper in the conversation about the coffee industry. And I do feel like the way that they ended that article, it wasn't an insult, but it was sort of a slap in the face a bit for the independent coffee roasters of New Zealand, because it was kind of done in a way that sort of just dismissed things. I think it also didn't do any justice for those brands that are owned by bigger companies, because they do have a massive part to play in our industry. And there was a great opportunity there to do them justice as well. And I felt like it just sort of, the article started really well, and then it got to that point and it just collapsed in. And it's a shame. I mean, I think the reality here quite potentially is that media and journalism in New Zealand seems to be a dying breed. Right? There's a lot of chatter around that. Do not quote me on this, but I did have a customer walk in today to tell me that Sky just purchased TV3 for $1. Now, I will go find out whether that's real or not. But that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, because journalism, we talked about newsprint being dead. Television is dead, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is because we're in this day and age, especially coming through COVID period, where there are better non-journalist writers and authors and bloggers out there than there are those people that actually went to tertiary education to study journalism. You see, there's an opinion piece.
Yes, and a lot of those people, as you say, they are a specialist subject and they are passionate about that subject, and that's why you get better work from them. They know about the subject, they know what questions to ask. And because they're specialist subjects, and this is giving a little bit of defense to the mainstream media, is that with these specialist subjects, there is less time-critical reporting, though this particular article, or these two articles that kind of got us fired up, they were never time-critical. They were not written by the same journalist, however.
And the funny thing is if they'd said, cool, look, you've written this article, we're going to bench that article for 2, maybe 3 weeks, most people wouldn't have even picked it up.
Yeah.
Like, we pick it up because we're not just general public reading whatever's on the news, we're reading specific to coffee, so we would have picked it up. But general public wouldn't necessarily picked it up. And so it's like the conversation, the articles from the media around coffee, it almost feels like, yeah, clickbait to a degree, but even more so a gap filler, as if they've run out of content. They know they need to publish X quota. They've run out of content. So what's the low-hanging fruit?
Again, a bit of defense, because it's probably become apparent already that I'm the one that was born with the wooden spoon in my hand instead of the silver spoon in my mouth. And I do want to defend some of these bigger companies again, because, as you said before, these guys have played a really important part, and they are retaining these brands that inspired us. They're continuing that legacy. While some of these brands may not have aged well, they're still an important part of people's coffee journey. And so there are numerous big companies out there that own 3 or 4 of these, and they'll have a good, better, best. A good example with this, because we've all grown up with Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola have a good, better, best system with their coffee.
But you are right. I mean, I know of at least one other coffee roasting company that they do own multiple brands, and in the New Zealand market, 2 of them are present, and they do have their premium range and their what would compare as a supermarket range, right? That's and that to me is actually good business. Like, that's actually very good business.
And it's not just
if we were in a position to own multiple brands, for whatever reason we're in that position, we'd do the same thing. You know, we would have a supermarket level range, and then we would have our premium, our cafe level range. We just have a cafe level range. We are a luxury item. You're not seeing us on the supermarket.
Well, one of the reasons that some companies do that, and I cannot comment on any specific ones. However, I am aware of actors earlier in the supply chain so green sourcing companies, for instance, who will buy the entirety of what their producers produce. The higher quality stuff will go through under their premium brands like Empire, and roasters will then sell that coffee as single origin or as farm lots under that farmer's name, building a brand and a following for that farmer. And you guys out there have probably got your favourite producers that you buy anytime you see their coffee year after year. The lower grade stuff, because no producer produces just competition grade coffee or specialty grade coffee. There is always lower grade coffee despite anyone's best intentions. And by buying the entire harvest, they can then sell that coffee into the commodity market as another brand, as just a regional lot, as a commodity coffee. It's protecting that farmer's intellectual property of his name and otherwise. So his name, his farm name, his quality, by having an avenue for that to go down where they know that it's protected, and you're not going to have somebody buying a mid-70 point cup and putting Empire Coffee Roasters on it and therefore devaluing the product for him. So it's protecting everybody's IP. So that's a reason why of the good, better, best situation. And also it means that you can cover a few more markets. They might just have a bean to cup machine. They don't care. They're not going to put any signage on there. And you don't want your signage on there as a premium brand. But because it helps your entire supply chain, that's your business model, it works better. But then you can also be working at the other end of the scale. It's not necessarily a filthy way of doing business, though I have seen some things out there in the media saying that it is. And so, yeah, I do feel a little bit of a need to defend some of those guys with that, because they are, in some cases, trying to do the best by the guys a bit further down the supply chain that need a little bit more help.
Guys, as you can tell, Paul here is definitely not strictly high grown, because strictly high grown would never even consider defending the big players.
No, because I think it was one of his memes that or theirs, I'm not even going into that, but it was potentially one of strictly high grown's memes that I'm referencing there, and absolutely hilarious. But I'm not wanting to throw people under the bus. I'm wanting to start and have important conversations.
And I think that's the thing. The media has had a huge opportunity to have these important conversations. I don't feel like that they have, or that they've done them justice. And I think on the same terms as what you've said, we do have to give respect to the media of old. They were something in New Zealand. I don't feel like they're something now, so to speak. I feel like they have really, especially after COVID, I feel like they sort of like, everyone got through COVID, they were exhausted, everyone sort of like walked away from being a journalist, and then a whole new crop of people that had pens in their hands said, well, I could do it. And that's generalization.
Funnily enough.
Don't sue me.
Yeah.
I think, there's been great opportunities to have real conversations about coffee. I don't feel like they necessarily have, or when they've started to, like the Ripe article that the article of Ripe Coffee Roasters that you referenced, they've started off really strong and then just fallen flat purely because of the content that they've used. I don't actually think the interview itself that came from would have actually been a flat interview. I think it would be quite an informative interview.
Absolutely.
And if you being the person that was interviewed is listening to this, I'd love to sit down and have a coffee and have a chat with you.
Because we'd love to have a coffee and have you on.
I think you've got probably a phenomenal coffee brain that I would love to actually pick. But I think the part of it that they used was just flat. And I think that's the thing. The media seems to be very biased against coffee, and they're not factually incorrect. The price of coffee is going up. The price of coffee does need to go up. I've said from day one that I'm the biggest believer in the $8 flat white. No, I do not charge $8 because there is more to take into consideration than just the product itself. Demographics, social expectations, those are huge parts that you've got to play. Marketing is a huge part you've got to play, you've got to consider. But I am a big believer in the $8 flat white. But the media is constantly bagging on it. So they're not being untruthful. They're not giving you false facts. The price of coffee is going up. It has to go up. Rents have gone up. Wages have, look at the difference in wages in 10 years, minimum wage. And yes, now we can open up another can of worms where we talk about, how the hospitality industry is built on minimum wage. A good portion of it is. A good portion of a lot of industries is built on minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right? But that does mean that the price goes up. And minimum wage goes up.
Yes.
80% of the time, everybody's wage in the industry goes up with it. Right?
And it pushes up the cost of everybody who touches that product.
Yeah.
Freight had pushed up the price of...
The price of coffee going up isn't new.
No.
Going on and on and on and on about it without actually providing understanding and education is the problem. Going on and bagging it and saying, oh, you're not going to be able to do this, you're not going to be able to do that, you might have to start sacrificing this. Yeah, you know what? Some of us do actually have to make sacrifices. That is the reality. Is it the be-all, end-all sacrificing your cup of coffee? Like I said, you sacrifice your coffee for a year, you're still not buying a house.
Quality.
Right? So you as an individual have to work out what you and your household need you to give up to be able to make it through tough times.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing is, we're bagging on it now and saying, oh, we're in a recession, you need to stop having your cup of coffee. And people start thinking, okay, you know what, cut back on my cup of coffee. And when the good times start rolling again, they're like, we'll just go back to normal. 70% of the time they don't, because so subconsciously the media has led us on this idea, or whatever's led us on this idea of cutting this back, and we've created a new habit, and that habit is what sticks until something else upheaves that habit. But the level of biasm in the media, where it is looking at coffee as a negative aspect, let's look at the coffee from the price increase of coffee from a positive aspect, and I'll probably start seeing pitchforks for this one, right? But if the price of coffee has to go up, right, That means that costs of things are going up. Yes. Raw materials are going up. Yes. That means that people are, to a degree, in different areas, getting paid more as well. Yes. So yes, if rents go up, landlords are getting more money into their pocket. Now, whether that money is going into their pocket directly or into the insurance company or for rate is one thing. You could say it's going into those things, but minimum wage goes up. That means somebody's getting more money into their pocket, but they've got insurances and rent and rates and so on and so forth to pay as well. So the price of coffee going up does mean that there is more money being circulated. The value of that money is not as great, but there is more money being circulated.
And so, therefore, it comes down to, if you're paying more for things, the reality is, if you really want to see a greater good for spending more to get effectively the same thing, vote with your wallet. Support the places that give you value for money. Support the places that are actually going to give you or your local community that money back. Spend local. Spend with small business. That could be an absolutely shameless plug for us, but it's not just us talking about that either. It's across the board.
I think it's important to note, especially for those of us in the specialty coffee industry. I mean, any cafe, anyone, right, that's in business, you need to put your prices up. All right, that is reality. If you're not making a profit in business, why are you in business? Profit is not a dirty thing. It is not an ugly thing. All right, profit is the point. And it's actually good. Profit is a good thing. And that's another conversation for another day, possibly on a completely different podcast that's not coffee related. But if you need to put your prices up and you're struggling to do so because of fear or because, you're worried about losing customers, you're worried about looking bad because of it, if you're that worried, create value.
Absolutely. Create and that goes back to what we said last time.
More value. Whether you're sitting there saying, all right, well, we're going to put our prices up, but we're going to create more education around our blend that we're using, or more education around the sourcing of the milk that we're using or the breads that we're using in our cafe, or we're going to start having some community events. Whatever it is, create more value, whether it be value directly related to your product or value for your community. This is key. That is a huge thing from a marketing perspective. Without washing it, phenomenal opportunities to really put yourself out there and really say, hey, yes, our price is $8 a flat white and we're worth it. This is why.
And that's something in the same week, Richard from Flight Coffee, David from Society, Hans from Allies, and a couple of others were all in the media or on blogs on their website talking about the $8 coffee. So at that point, I wrote my For What It's Worth blog. And I remember you commenting that it was a completely different take on what everybody was talking, which I pride myself on looking at things from a completely different angle, which can be quite controversial sometimes. But one of the points that I made, and I made a few key points at the end of that about the price of coffee and about adding value and so on. And one of those points was that if your barista can't articulate where your coffee's from, it's not worth $8. There's a few little things that just are important to adding value. Consistency, hospitality, again, quality. And again, I'd kind of like to finish this podcast with the same point that I did that blog. And this is to everybody in hospo who has a coffee machine. You wouldn't let the dishy cook the steak, so stop devaluing the role of the barista and letting just any fool on the coffee machine. Value your coffee and your customer's dollar.
Educate, train.
Absolutely. And that's from...
On a slight tangent here, I'm currently reading a book by, I can't pronounce his last name, so don't sue me on this one either, Will Guidara, called Unreasonable Hospitality. Anyone in the industry, anyone that wants a book, phenomenal book, right? I'm really, really enjoying it. And it got me thinking earlier on, not just this book, but a large portion of business books that I've read over the years, whether it be hospitality related or business in general, have almost sometimes up to 60% of the focus of that book is on employees. It's on employees. Yeah, there'll be a bit about marketing, there'll be a bit about community work, there'll be a bit about this, but majority of those books about employees. And the key takeaways from that is hire right, train well, and educate. You want to create value and you want to create, be able to create that value for your customers, for your clients. You have to have the right people doing so. You have to have the right people on your team. You have to provide that training for them and that education. And guess what? If you provide training and education for your staff, all right, and you actually invest in your staff in the process, they're going to invest more in your customers. Yeah, it's going to cost you money to begin with, but you know what? It comes back because they are going to feel more at home, enjoy their job more, be more focused and invested into it. That then is going to outpour onto your customers. So your staff are going to want to learn more and understand more, which then they're going to drop with the customers as well. The customers are going to learn more. The customers are going to start feeling value. And all you had to do was make sure that the training was in place and the education was available to be able to uplift your team. And they are doing the value add themselves.
That's a huge thing. And again, that training and otherwise, don't want to throw half of the industry under the bus here, but a lot of cafes, the people who start them are really passionate about food. They're not passionate coffee people, but you need coffee to sell food. And again, choose your partnerships wisely, because that training, where the coffee industry, roasters are the coffee professionals. We are, as an industry, are the coffee specialists. That is who you go to for good training. And so
I'm not asking a chef for recommendations on coffee. I tell you, the number of chefs I've spoken to that think they know how to make coffee better than a barista does is astounding, and some of them actually do know how to make coffee better than some baristas. But I'll go to a chef for food information. I'm not going to a chef to know about coffee.
And that's the thing. It's about choosing your target market. No matter what business you're in, choose your target market and stick to it fiercely. And if you're going to change it properly. Don't try and be half in one camp, half in the other. If you're competing on quality, you'll never have to compete on price. If you're competing on price, you'll never compete on quality.
There you have it.
And we're done. Thank you, everybody.
Guys,
and we'll
thank you for joining us for one. Yeah, thank you for joining us for another episode. I think we went a little bit on some tangents here. I would say that's probably going to become the expected for us, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's okay. We're trying to give you some teasers into what is to come. And again, just to anyone who's made it to the end, thank you very much. And so if you're in the industry and you would love to come on board and have a yarn with us, and anonymously or publicly, slide into our DMs. Conversely, if you've got some things you would love to see us grind quite coarsely, then let us know in the comments, because I'm sure there's going to come a time where we run out of material.
Okay. And guys, like we said previously, we are just kicking this off. This is our first time doing podcasting. This is our first time sort of putting ourselves out there like this. And so it is going to be quite unrefined. We are going to work on cleaning things up and getting better at this and getting a better flow. And that's done by time in the market, basically. It'll take us time to get there. And so thank you for bearing with us this far. Thank you for coming with us on the rest of the journey. And yes, send any lawsuits to Paul over there.
Yep.
Did you,
awesome.
After we got off the last recording, did you by chance call up your insurance broker to check out the details around your insurance?
Yeah, they didn't pick up the call.
Yeah, funny that. Mine didn't either.
And again, feel free, tell us in the comments if you like the length of the pods as well. I'm all too happy to set a stopwatch and say to Ethan, look, the viewers want 20 minutes and we'll make it work. But if you're happy, then we're happy.
Yeah, it's going to be some pretty coarse 20 minutes, I'll give you that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, hey, thanks guys for listening. Hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Give us a like, give us a follow on Instagram, Coarse Grind. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Excellent. Thank you very much. See you.